Singapore tonight, a more gloomy outlook for the economy amid subdued global growth. The central bank gives that downbeat assessment, predicting higher unemployment and lower wage growth. But there are some bright spots. The stage is set for the Bukit Batok by-election. The PAP's Murali Pillay and SDP's Chee Soon-juan are going head-to-head for the single-seat ward. And milking innovative recipes for success. Local companies are urged to do even more to protect and monetize their intellectual property. Hello and welcome to Singapore Tonight. I'm Dawn Tan. Our top story tonight, Singapore's central bank has put forward a more cautious outlook on the country's growth in the near term. And that's because of the weak global environment. In its half-yearly macroeconomic review, the Monetary Authority of Singapore also says it expects higher unemployment and lower wage growth. Now, while economists say it's unlikely MAS will move toward further easing of monetary policy, they believe the authorities could consider other fiscal tools to stimulate the economy. Patrick John Lim reports.
Singapore's economic growth is expected to remain slow amid cyclical headwinds. The country's central bank adopted a cautionary note as prospects for city-states' key trading partners, such as the G3 nations and China, remain subdued.
The whole world being very reliant with trading with China, be it in goods or services. Once China is slowing down, certainly that affects everywhere else, and likely Singapore as well, because China today is Singapore's largest exporting and importing nation. So with a slowdown in China, that certainly has an impact on Singapore's domestic growth.
One bright spot amid the gloom is India. The Monetary Authority of Singapore said India is expected to remain on a modest expansion path driven by private consumption and increased public infrastructure spending. On the home front, the MAS observed slowing business activity among domestic firms. This was seen in declining business loans growth as well as an uptick in redundancies. However, MAS noted that the bulk of redundancies were largely confined to trade-related industries, such as electronics and precision engineering. Against the backdrop of sluggish growth, MAS had earlier shifted its monetary policy to a neutral stance. But economists say the government should deploy other tools to stimulate growth.
There's a need for a more coordinated policy response to tackle issues of mediocre growth and disinflationary pressures. Right? So this policy response will come in the form of off-budget measures. Right? There's still space for it. There's also leeway for a review of existing macroprudential measures if need. So all in, I think that would be mean that greater reliance on other policy instruments other than monetary policy should actually help prop up the economy to some extent.
Looking ahead, MAS says the long-term prospects for regional services trade still look bright as the ongoing rebalancing in the Chinese economy toward more consumption-led growth is expected to fuel demand for imported services. Now, overall, MAS expects the Singapore economy to grow at a rate of between 1% and 3% for the full year.
And we'll get more analysis on the economic outlook a little later on in our business segment. It's official, the by-election for the single seat of Bukit Batok will see a straight fight between the People's Action Party's Murali Pillay and the Singapore Democratic Party's Chee Soon-juan. Now, both candidates successfully filed their nomination papers today and have begun campaigning in earnest for support from the slightly over 25,000 registered voters in the constituency. Our news team was at Cumming Primary where the action was.
PAP candidate Murali Pillay arrived at the nomination centre at Cumming Primary School, accompanied by Deputy Prime Minister Tharman Shanmugaratnam, who is also the party's second Assistant Secretary General.
I'm really delighted that a number of fellow comrades from the party are here to support me on this nomination day. You know, this is despite today being a weekday. Every one of them, white in white, giving me lots of encouragement, so I'm very thankful to them.
The 48-year-old lawyer was greeted by supporters in high spirits despite the hot weather. Other PAP MPs and ministers were also on hand to lend their support. Shortly after 12:30 p.m., with nominations closed and no objections raised, the returning officer confirmed that Mr. Murali will be a candidate in the by-election.
Murali Pillay of the People's Action Party.
Thomas, thanks a lot. Thank you, everybody. Okay, guys, just wanted to say thanks to everybody. James?
Speaking to reporters after the nomination, Mr. Murali tackled head-on the controversy in recent days over estate upgrading known as the Neighbourhood Renewal Programme, or NRP.
We have put up a comprehensive statement in relation to what SDP had stated. As I mentioned in the press conference yesterday, NRP is actually a funding-neutral program. So whoever Bukit Batok resident chooses will have the responsibility of leading the town council to implement the NRP.
Mr. Murali has said that he is no stranger to Bukit Batok, having served in the grassroots there for the past 16 years.
I understand their concerns because we are facing a gloomy economic climate. They're concerned about jobs. They're concerned about costs for their elderly family members who may be sick. They're concerned about how to uplift children, particularly the children from our low-income families. So these are the plans that I'll be discussing with them. And I also hope that we can continue to serve Bukit Batok residents as part of the Jurong family, because Jurong family is a bigger community and we would enjoy economies of scale. Should I be elected, I will not just talk in Parliament or on YouTube, but really the idea is to come up with actionable plans on the ground to help Bukit Batok residents.
In the coming days, Mr. Murali says he intends to meet as many people as possible in Bukit Batok on the campaign to explain his plans to residents. Rallies are also expected to be held in the coming days before residents head to the polls on May 7th. This is the second time that Mr. Murali has stood for election, having contested in the general election last year as part of PAP's Aljunied GRC team. That PAP team narrowly lost to the incumbent Workers' Party, securing 49.05% of the votes.
Singapore Democratic Party Secretary General Chee Soon Juan arrived at the nomination centre, accompanied by his wife, party members and opposition supporters. Speaking to reporters before he filed his nomination papers, Dr. Chee said the SDP has been working hard to improve itself since last year's general election, when none of its 11 candidates were elected. The battle lines were officially drawn shortly after 12:30 p.m.
Murali Pillay of the People's Action Party and Chee Soon Juan of the Singapore Democratic Party are the candidates who have been nominated for the by-election for Bukit Batok.
This led to loud cheers from the SDP supporters.
Residents, voters of Bukit Batok, if I am so fortunate as to be elected your MP, I will serve this constituency on a full-time basis. And to be able to take care of your needs, my top priority will be to take care of the housing estate and run the town council in the most productive manner. Additionally, I want to make Bukit Batok the envy of Singapore and foster this wonderful community that we have before us. I will be your voice, your alternative voice in Parliament, to take your highest hopes, your deepest aspirations with me to Parliament. So now is the time. Vote. Vote for Chee Soon Juan. Vote for SDP. Vote for Singapore. Thank you very much.
Speaking to reporters after the nomination formalities were over, Dr. Chee immediately got down to the business of campaigning, taking aim at the plans that had been outlined by the PAP to Bukit Batok residents in the lead-up to the by-election, and also during the general election in 2015.
I think it included a couple of childcare centres and elder care and a new hawker centre. What I want to ask the PAP now, okay, is what happened to that project then? Give us a progress report. What has been done? Has anything been done? Okay? If nothing has been done yet, show us the blueprint. Right? Whether it's URA or HDB, show it to us. Has anything been put in place? If not, then why not? Were those just promises to entice voters, and then you do something else, worse, do nothing else after the GE? That must be made clear. So, this is where Mr. Murali, I think, needs to address this issue and be able to tell Bukit Batok residents what has been going on. All right? You don't just discard $24 million of projects and then make promises, and then when the by-election comes, forget about all that and say, I'll give you $1.9 million. That's just not how politics should be conducted.
The 53-year-old, who is currently a full-time politician, has promised voters of Bukit Batok that if elected, he will be a full-time MP. It's the 5th time Dr. Chi has put himself forward for election. Now, the party previously contested Bukit Batok SMC in the 2015 general elections, but fielded a different candidate at that time. And now, with nomination day proceedings all wrapped up, the party says that Dr. Chi will continue with his house visits and walkabouts to meet Bukit Batok residents over the next few days. And he will also be preparing his speeches for the upcoming election rallies.
Now, 2 sites have been identified for election rallies, Bukit Gombak Stadium and the field along Bukit Batok Industrial Park A. But there'll be no rallies tomorrow. Police say they haven't received any applications. Rallies can be held from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. every day until the 5th of May. Moving on now, and a couple of potential independent candidates also turned up at the nomination centre today. Now, that triggered a brief period of speculation that there might be more than a straight fight in the single seat. Nadia Jansen Hassan with more.
Mr. Kwan Yew Keng is no stranger to Bukit Batok. A former Central Executive Committee member of the Singapore Democratic Party and National Solidarity Party, he contested the constituency in the 1988 and 1991 general elections, losing both times to the PAP's Dr. Ong Chit Chung. But the 68-year-old told the media after he arrived at the Kerming Primary School nomination centre that this time he had come to act as a standby in case the SDP's Dr. Chi Soon Juan was disqualified from standing for any reason. Mr. Kwan left without filing his nomination papers. Uber driver Sherwin Yu, on the other hand, had earlier made known his intentions to contest the by-election. But the 32-year-old came alone without any assenters and also left without filing any papers. The Elections Department said in a statement that this was after officials explained the requirements and procedure for nomination as an election candidate to both Mr. Yu and Mr. Kwan.
Joining me is political analyst, Associate Professor Eugene Tan from Singapore Management University. Welcome to the programme, Eugene. Good to see you again.
Good evening, Dawn.
So campaigning has begun in earnest, so let's talk strategy. Mr. Murali, he's talked about, in his manifesto, about jobs, healthcare costs and so on. Meanwhile, the SDP slogan is, now is the time. Chi Soon Juan says, why do we need another PAP MP in Parliament? So what tact will each candidate take?
Well, in many ways, no different from other elections, whether general or by-elections. Particularly in the by-election, national issues are not really in play. I mean, that's not to say that they will not feature. I think they will. But I think what we are seeing in both candidates are each of them going on what they think are their strong points, right? And so for Mr. Murali, it's about the track record, the general state of satisfaction, that voters have, with the services provided by Jurong Clementi Town Council. So in that sense, Mr. Murali is very focused, looking at, emphasizing the track record that his party has had, and also emphasizing his long association with Bukit Batok, where he served for 16 years until he was redeployed to Paya Lebar. For Dr. Chi, it's really trying to talk about, well, why do you need another PAP MP? So he's saying, well, it's not just about having another opposition MP, but a different type of opposition party, because we now have in Parliament all the opposition MPs from the Workers' Party. So each of them will certainly leverage on what they think are their best selling points, and they will certainly want to reach out to voters in a way, that will emphasize, that voting for them, each of them, will be in the voters' best interest.
Right. His message maybe being something to do with accountability. Well, DPM Tharman did talk about his feelings about Mr. Murali's candidacy here. He says he likes him. He says he likes his approach, the fact that he scrutinizes government policies and so on. In a sense, saying perhaps he's no yes man. He can be also an alternative voice in Parliament. So what's your take on that?
I would say that that's certainly a ringing endorsement. I mean, we mustn't forget, DPM Tharman Shanmugaratnam helms the Jurong GRC, and between 1997 and 2011, Bukit Batok was part of Jurong GRC, and so the standing, the influence that DPM Tharman has, I think would certainly mean that that endorsement would be helpful. It's not going to be decided on just that, but certainly the fact that you have a very popular DPM in Bukit Batok endorsing the candidate there, I think speaks a lot. And I think certainly it compares with Dr. Chi, again emphasizing that now is the time. And I think he's also aware that this by-election is as good as it gets, in terms of securing the best chance for him to be elected into Parliament. So we are looking at the seat vacated in less than positive circumstances for a ruling party. At the same time, a by-election in which voters know that the balance of power will not be changed at all, even if an opposition candidate were to be elected.
Eugene, I want your take on this. To what extent do you think David Ong's resignation will play a part in this by-election, if at all?
My sense is that probably not much. I mean, certainly voters know why they're going to the polls on the 7th of May. But I think, we're not looking at a situation in which the former MP was derelict in his duties. I mean, he was, by most accounts, very popular and very much active on the ground. So I don't think it will be a big issue. And I think, if Dr. Chi were to make too much out of it, then I think it will lead voters to wonder whether is he focusing on the issues, right, that the voters and residents of Bukit Batok are concerned with, which is very much bread and butter. We mustn't forget that Bukit Batok is very much a very working class, and by that, I mean public housing. We're looking at 94–95% public housing. And of that, a vast majority being 1-room to 4-room flats. So I think these are issues that will matter to the voters.
Right. What about that, much talked about by-election effect? Do you think that's going to have a part in this?
It is a by-election, so I think there will be, the so-called by-election effect. But I think the main question that we should be asking is, will that effect be translated to a by-election advantage? So I think they're two separate things. So by-election effect to me means that voters know that, well, it's not going to change the balance of power in Parliament. But I think by-election advantage would mean that voters feel confident enough to vote for the opposition candidate, knowing that they will perhaps get something that's no different from what they would get from a PAP candidate. And that really is the crux of the matter. Are voters confident, given Dr. Chi's track record, given that the SDP has been, for many years, have not run a town council? I think these are issues that, despite the plans, that both candidates have laid out, voters will be asking themselves, which candidate is going to make those plans come to reality, and that to them will be a very critical question.
Right. One quick final question for you, Eugene. Since the last general election, Dr. Chi Soon-juan has really crafted this narrative of being a family man, sort of more open, more personable almost. Do you think, voters will sort of take that into account? It will hold sway with them at all?
Well, I think given his very colourful past, I think certainly, Dr. Chi is aware that he needs to have a different narrative. And so I think certainly, the idea, in light of how the seat was vacated by the former MP, Mr. David Ong, running the family man narrative, perhaps to him might gain some advantage, but ultimately, while narratives are important, voters are going to be focused on, what is in their best interest, So I think that's where, the election will be fought on their plans and on how they are going to bring them to reality. And that, to me, will be something that voters will be keeping their eyes very much clued in.
And the rest of us as well. Our attention is going to be firmly on the next 9 days. Thank you so much, Eugene, for coming into the studios to share that with me. I've been speaking there to political watcher Eugene Tan. It's time for a short break now, but when we return, I'll be speaking with economist Jeff Ng about the central bank's outlook for the economy, more on what bright spots there are for businesses and workers, plus what's in store for the Sing dollar. Don't go away. Welcome back to Singapore Tonight. A reminder of our top story. The central bank says slower economic growth will persist in the near term amid a weak global environment. It also expects higher unemployment and lower wage growth. Now let's get the thoughts of Jeff Ng. He's an economist at Standard Chartered, specializing in the ASEAN region. Welcome, Jeff. Good to see you. All right, so Singapore Central Bank sees that protracted period of slow growth. Which sectors do you think are going to be taking the brunt of this?
Well, given that we are in an environment where global growth is stagnating, and at best, I think things will likely only pick up second half of this year or even next year, I think the manufacturing sector, which has underperformed so far, could continue to do so. And at the same time, given that the momentum in some of the services trade, as well as the domestic-oriented services have slowed down a bit during the first quarter of the year, this trend could continue to persist as both the domestic demand as well as external demand remains pretty subdued.
So, Jeff, that services demand that you mentioned there, it's one sector that seems to be beating the odds somewhat. Demand from China and elsewhere as well in ASEAN. How can companies actually leverage on this?
If you look at beyond this sluggish environment, I think it's still important to note that 1/3 of global growth this year will likely come from China, and more than half of global growth will come from the entire region, which is including ASEAN and India itself. So it's important to realize that as the region becomes more affluent and demand for services becomes more sophisticated, I think there's definitely scope for a lot of companies in Singapore and in the region as well to benefit from this, and this could come in the form of more modern services such as like telecommunications and such.
Right, so you mentioned the oil and gas sector and marine sector as well. I mean, they continue to take a beating, of course, affected by that cutback in global exploration and expenditure and so on. What can those companies do to mitigate the negative impacts from all of this?
A lot will depend on the global oil price outlook for the rest of the year. If you look at oil prices so far this year, they've already started to stabilize and even trend upwards for the rest of the year. So if that continues, we could actually see some of these oil investment, which has been pretty subdued due to the lower oil price environment, start to rebound back a bit, especially if the oil prices rebounds have been a bit more sustained, and if that persists, they could actually benefit going forward.
Right.
But I think for now, if the prices stabilize, then I think it should still remain pretty subdued. And I think the challenge will be to find more productive activities going forward.
Right. Jeff, I want your take on the moves by the MAS to to sort of flatten the Sing dollar policy, ease policy and so on, 10-year zero rates with the Sing dollar. It said the move wasn't meant to weaken the Singapore dollar, but some people say, they think the MAS isn't comfortable with the strength of the Sing dollar against other currencies. So, taking into account the global headwinds that we're seeing right now. So what's your take on that?
Well, if you look at their movements over the past few meetings, they've gradually lowered the slope of the appreciation of the Singapore dollar against the basket of currencies, and even based on the price movements of the Sing dollar over the past few weeks, there hasn't been much of an impact. So by keeping this Sing dollar stable against the rest of the currencies, I think it's also trying to moderate some of the concerns that growth continues to be pretty moderate, and given that inflation is also likely to stay pretty muted. There's really sort of like no impetus for them to actually keep the CNA appreciating. And,
right.
Yeah.
So do you think the recent monetary policy will support the economy, will be able to boost inflation over the next 2 years?
Well, I think it will stay accommodative and help to support, both growth and inflation at the margins. I think underlying momentum still looks pretty weak, and given that there's been some creeping up of the unemployment rate over the past few quarters as well, and with the budget also trying to attempt to support both medium-term and short-term growth, I think both fiscal and monetary policy measures are also trying to address some of the long-term as well as the short-term issues.
Right. And how concerned should we be, Jeff, about the MES's projection that to expect more unemployment and lower wage growth?
If you look at the economy so far, overall growth has been pretty lackluster. We are in an environment where external demand has been weak, domestic demand has been subdued, and given that the economy is also in restructuring, I think we can still expect this current lackluster labour market to continue. And given that last year wage growth was actually quite strong and much stronger than previously expected, there could be some base effects that could creep in this year as well. But I think going forward, if if we see some of the external demand coming back, and while the domestic demand remains resilient, we could actually see some improvement.
All right, thank you very much, Jeff, for that perspective. I've been speaking there to Jeff Ng, economist from Standard Chartered Bank. As the economy restructures, the government will strengthen its policies and resource support for companies and workers. But employers and unions also need to do their part to become manpower lean. That's the message from Manpower Minister Lim Swee Say in his May Day address. Mr. Lim said the transformation journey has begun as the government aims to create jobs of the future, ensure that the workforce develops the skills needed, and build careers for Singaporeans, all of which are the ultimate objective of economic growth. Now, he noted that companies should learn to take better care of all employees, regardless of age and qualifications, and also invest in them and help them develop to their fullest potential. Unions will have to rally workers to keep learning, upgrading and updating their skills to be of greater value to their employers. And meanwhile, the Singapore National Employers Federation says it's important to transform workplace practices, adapt to an ageing population and build the Singaporean core together. And innovation is key to becoming manpower lean and spurring all that economic growth. The Manpower Minister said that at a showcase of smart technologies organised by the Infocom Development Authority yesterday.
Manpower lean is no longer an option. We must all become manpower lean. There's no way we can continue life as per normal, like it's the last 5 years. There's no way we're going to create another 500,000 jobs and not be able to find the workers. All right. So therefore, take that as a new normal in the future. And for those of you who want to become manpower lean, we help you in terms of adopting a new mindset, in terms of how to think lean in every way.
This could include adopting the use of intelligent brain systems, which can be fitted onto industrial cleaning machines like this mechanical scrubber. This homegrown solution allows technicians to manage multiple machines at the same time, with one robot freeing up 3 workers to perform other tasks. Other technologies IDA is exploring include the Yumi collaborative robot, which is dexterous enough to even fold napkins in restaurants. Now, SMEs can tap on grants offered by agencies like IDA in Spring Singapore to implement such technology.
Many SMEs say cost of doing business in Singapore is very high, very high. So if things are expensive, what do you do? If it's expensive, you minimize waste, you see. And the same thing applies to lean thinking, lean innovation. Anything. From manpower to labor from manpower to floor space to utility to everything, to raw material. All right? Just think of a way of minimize the wastage.
Technology as one of the resources which Singapore is not short of as we invest more and more in the smart technologies into the smart nation. So for industries which are facing shortage in terms of manpower, we think that they need to consider the technology angle.
And in stock market action, Singapore shares lost ground today, with investors staying cautious ahead of the US Fed policy announcement later tonight. The Fed is not expected to raise interest rates just yet, but market watchers will be looking out for hints on whether it will act in June. Now, the STI falling by 0.7% to close the day at 2,874.72. Banks were lower today, UOB falling by more than 2.5%, while DBS and OCBC were down by about 0.5%. Among property counters, CapitaLand pulled ahead by 3%, but CityDev fell by 0.5%. Among rig builders, Keppel Corp and Sembcorp Marine stayed in the black by just under 0.5%. Another blue chip stock, Singtel falling by 2%, but SIA managed to climb 0.2%. The Competition Commission of Singapore wants to drive efforts to align competition policies and laws across ASEAN. This comes as competition advocacy is a key area of focus for the ASEAN Economic Community, which is driving growth in Southeast Asia. Now, the Commission says alongside economic growth, e-commerce and new disruptive technologies, such as third-party taxi booking apps, have the potential to boost the competitiveness of economies. This was one of the key themes at this year's International Competition Network's annual conference held in Singapore. And that's why the Commission will launch a competition policy and law program across ASEAN. For the first time, such a platform is being set up for stakeholders across the region to collaborate. Minister Lim Hng Kiang said such efforts will improve the grouping's competitiveness on the global stage and increase certainty for businesses across the region.
Even though there are differences in the implementation of competition policy and law among the ASEAN economies due to our different stages of economic development, ASEAN members agree that there is a need to have a consistent approach to reach out to relevant stakeholders. This is to ensure that competition policy and law is consistent and well understood across our region.
Yesterday was World Intellectual Property Day, and Singapore firms have been urged to do more to monetize their intellectual property, particularly in taking their brands and innovations to overseas markets. Observers say this comes as IP patent and trademark applications by local businesses hit an all-time high last year. Here's Nicole Tan with the report.
Sharon Tay was an investment banker for 8 years, but about 2 years ago she decided to leave the trading room for the kitchen. Ms. Tay went to Italy to learn gelato and pastry making techniques and returned to Singapore to create a line of flavors for the local palate. Her ice cream brand Momolato now has about 50 flavors, including local ones like pandan, salted gula melaka and popcorn, and bobo hitam.
One of the things that Momolato does is a gelato popsicle, which is unusual because popsicles tend to be a little more icy. But Momolato says it's been able to find a way to maintain that creamy texture with a special milk base, and then it pops it into this deep freezer for about 20 minutes, and then let's give it a try.
Ms. Tay says certain flavors have taken up to 2 months to create, and that the brand's trademark helps to protect her innovations.
We trademark Momolato because we would like to think that our brand is synonymous with creativity, with innovation, and with consistency and use of premium ingredients. We engage more in pop-up markets. We are a wholesaler, we do not have our own shop. So when people see the word Momolato or the logo, the branding Momolato, they will be reminded, of this is what we do and the flavors that we come up with.
Momolato's among a growing number of Singapore firms seeking to protect their intellectual property. In 2015, Intellectual Property Office of Singapore, or IPOS, says trademark applications rose almost 10% from the year before to 44,000, while patent applications increased 5% on year to almost 11,000. Still, it says while applications are at an all-time high, Singapore firms can go further in monetizing their intellectual property.
Not enough of them are making use of it in a way that is part of their core business. So what we advise companies to do is to think about where they want to go right from the start, incorporate IP into their strategy right from the start, and then once they know which markets they're going to, go out there and try and protect their IP in these markets first.
IPOS cited existing schemes under various government agencies like Spring and IE Singapore that businesses can tap on to help defray the costs of engaging an IP consultant.
Coming up after the break on Singapore Tonight, Singapore's foreign minister wraps up his visit to Japan, declaring it very good. He highlights common interests between the two countries. And we go behind the scenes at the CID as the President makes a special visit. Welcome back to Singapore Tonight. Thank you for staying with us. Singapore's Foreign Minister, Vivian Balakrishnan, has wrapped up what he says was a very good 4-day introductory visit to Tokyo. And this comes as Singapore and Japan mark 50 years of diplomatic ties. Dr. Balakrishnan met his Japanese counterpart and Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Our Japan Bureau Chief Michio Ishida with this report.
Among the key issues discussed were the challenges both Japan and Singapore confront in transforming their economies.
To keep up with the times, new technology, globalization, the tectonic shifts in Asia, all present both challenges and opportunities for us. Both of us are trading nations, so we all reaffirm the importance of the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, including our hope that our major partners like the United States will ratify this early.
Dr. Balakrishnan said a review of the two countries' bilateral free trade agreement could be completed by the end of the year at the earliest. He also said other areas where Singapore and Japan can work together include how to tackle low birth rate and a shrinking workforce.
If you still want growth, it has to be primarily through productivity. And productivity involves training, involves technology, and this is again another opportunity for Japan and Singapore to collaborate on, to make sure our workers have the necessary skills, the ability to work with new technology. And one new promising technology obviously is robots.
Dr. Balakrishnan said China was also discussed during his meetings. He noted that China is important to both countries, as Singapore is its largest foreign investor and Japan the third largest. He added that Singapore and Japan have a stake in the success and prosperity of China to promote further economic integration. But he pointed out that the East China Sea is a sensitive area for Japan, as the South China Sea is for ASEAN. He stressed that Singapore does not take sides, as the Republic is not a claimant state.
I would not take the role of an intermediator, especially for China and Japan. I mean, China is the second largest economy in the world. Japan is the third largest economy in the world. But the fact is, they are close neighbors. They have to work and live with each other and create a sphere of prosperity and peace.
Dr. Balakrishnan also noted the respect of Japanese leaders for Singapore's late founding Prime Minister, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. Japan has conferred the highest honors on Mr. Lee, which his son, Prime Minister Lee Hsien-loong, will receive when he visits Tokyo in September. Michio Ishida, Channel News Asia, Tokyo.
Militaries need to work more closely together if they're to effectively tackle common and transnational security challenges. That was the call from Singapore's defence minister at a conference on international security in Moscow. It brought together defence and military leaders from around the world.
To tackle these challenges, we must step up dialogue and practical cooperation. Platforms such as the East Asia Summit, the Asian Regional Forum, and the ASEAN Defence Ministers Meeting Plus allow countries from the Asia-Pacific and beyond to come together for dialogue and cooperation. In fact, the ADMM Plus, which is only 6 years old, has made good progress in strengthening practical cooperation between our militaries.
Dr. Ng also elaborated on Russia's contribution to a large-scale exercise that will take place next week. Focusing on maritime security and counter-terrorism, it will be co-hosted by Singapore, Brunei, Australia and New Zealand. He said different armed forces learn more about each other through such drills. They can then build trust and new capabilities to tackle common threats. Dr. Ng also encouraged the establishment of a common set of norms among militaries in the Asia-Pacific region to help diffuse tensions and reduce the risks of miscalculations. Now, the Singapore police force needs to make use of technology to improve officers' productivity as it confronts a shrinking labour pool. President Tony Tan Keng Yam made this point on the sidelines of a visit to the Criminal Investigation Department, or CID. The The president was shown forensic technology such as this tool that can extract data from any mobile phone. It has been rolled out at all 6 police land divisions to improve efficiency and forensic capabilities. Dr. Tan said the police force will also have to adapt to new challenges such as ever-changing forms of cybercrime and the increased threat of terrorism. But he added that the nation's safety shouldn't be the sole responsibility of the authorities.
Domestic security is an area which cannot be left only to the Singapore Police Force or to the government. All of us have to play our part. We have to be vigilant, and everyone can help the police force to keep Singapore safe by being observant, being careful.
Nanyang Technological University is hosting a forum on sustainable cities to tackle challenges faced by city planners. The 2-day annual event, which ends tomorrow, brings together scientists, industry leaders and policymakers from around the world. Topics discussed include climate change and how technology can be used to provide cities with renewable energy and clean water. NTU says findings will be included in a report, which will then be used for discussions at the World Cities Summit in July.
Our limited land area and lack of natural resources have meant that sustainability and efficient urban planning were always a priority for Singapore. It's only through the efforts of every stakeholder, and this includes individuals, businesses, and the government, that we can effectively fight the impact of climate change.
And coming up on the program, we talk to swimmer Kwa Cheng-wen about his preparations for the Olympics, and he tells us why his eye may be on a different prize. And support from a top accounting firm for a new book that teaches local athletes about how to get the right sponsors. Stay with us. Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. Swimmer Kwa Cheng-wen is setting modest goals for the Rio Olympics in August. He's met the Olympic A qualifying timing in 3 events, the 100 and 200 meter butterfly and the 100 meter backstroke, but has yet to decide if he will swim in all 3. For the 19-year-old, this year's Games is more of a stepping stone for the Tokyo Olympics in 4 years.
Realistically, I hope to make a semi-final or a final. And I think it will set me up pretty well for 2020. Going ahead with my swimming career, I think that it will give me a lot of confidence for the 2020 Tokyo Games. And who knows, I mean, like the 8 guys in the final, if I manage to squeeze in there, everyone's just so close, you know, anything could happen really.
Kwa spoke after being unveiled as the national poster boy for American-based Liberty Insurance. He'll appear in its online and print advertisements. Kwa was the most bemedaled athlete at last year's SEA Games and will also be organising swim clinics as part of Liberty Insurance's community outreach campaign. A book has been launched to educate athletes about how to engage in valuable and sustainable sponsorships. Funded by accounting firm Deloitte, Sponsorship for Athletes was written by Vicky Saunders, an expert on athlete sponsorship in her native Australia. The book has been customised to suit the local context, highlighting experiences that homegrown athletes have gone through in seeking sponsorships.
I think here it's a little bit different. Maybe companies don't actually know the value that athletes can offer, the way that an athlete can come in and actually help them with their marketing activities to achieve their business goals. And it doesn't have to be those athletes that are getting gold medals, it's athletes of all levels in all sports. I believe that sponsorship is going to create really valuable connections and opportunities for athletes and businesses, but it's really about educating them on how to get that right.
At the same time, SIM Global Education and the University of Stirling in the United Kingdom announced that they're offering 2 bond-free scholarships to local athletes keen on pursuing a sports studies and marketing degree. The degree will be conferred by the University of Stirling, Scotland's University of Sporting Excellence, and one of SIM's partner universities. A new abstract art exhibition has been launched as part of the ongoing French festival Voila. The exhibition at Niaja Gallery explores how abstract art can cross boundaries. From sculptures to digital prints, there are about 20 pieces created by two French artists, Singaporean painter Alan Tang and Spanish multimedia artist Asen Chacin. Her mural Diversity was picked as the gesturing white hands represent unity through communication, regardless of race, gender or age. Mr. Tang told Channel News Asia that he picked pieces with a story for the exhibition, like this painting, The Deep, which depicts the depth of sadness he felt after a breakup. Now, he hopes more Singaporeans will visit the exhibition, which runs until the 21st of May.
Singapore normally is very small, so especially Singaporean, like art to them is very tight. So more other countries come to Singapore and show Singaporean to know more other country art. I think it's good.
This has been Singapore Tonight. I'll leave you with more scenes from today's Nomination Day proceedings for the Bukit Batok by-election. Good night.